Well, hello, everyone. Today is Tuesday, December 19th, and this is the third Zoom meeting that we're having today. Thank you all for being here. I know some of you folks have been on some of the first couple. Let me just open up the floor. I can talk for days about this topic, but the whole purpose of having this is to get feedback from everybody else that's out there. You can certainly use the reaction button to raise your hand, which would be great. If someone else is talking, if you could be so kind as to remain muted, that'd be great. But uh, love to hear what everybody else has to say about the events of yesterday and the issue in general. So the floor is open. Anybody else want to speak?
Can you hear me, James?
I can. Chris, go right ahead.
Yeah, hi. Firstly, thanks for everything you're doing. It's brilliant. You're, well, the world expert on this subject. Amazing. It just shows how knowledgeable you are when you actually watch the inverted commas debate yesterday in inverted commas parliament. In other words, a cloakroom closet. It was, of course, a farce like they always are. So, yeah, it was very interesting. They didn't broach any of the 12 important points that you raised. Andrew Bridgen, he's a great guy, but he was not too long reading from the rather than talking from the heart article. Didn't really get important points across. The other MPs, again,
Chris, if I may interrupt you,
sadly,
if I may, is anybody else
yeah.
having difficulty hearing him, or is it just me? Yeah, I think something's up with your connection. I'm not sure.
Okay. Yeah, no, to be honest, I've never done this Zoom before or been like this on a computer. Can you hear me now or not?
Yeah, if you could just maybe speak a little bit slowly, we'd be able to decipher it. It's got a choppy nature to the connection, but go right ahead.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, I was just saying that, well, moving on to the MPs who were there in support of Andrew and us not signing away all of our freedom to WHO, they all sadly were in agreement that they would like to stay within the WHO, and I thought that was a real disappointment. They didn't seem to take on board any of the points you made in your inverted commas rant the other day, and the 12 points that you brought up. So it was a bit of a non-event. The real disgrace was the Labour MP, who virtually repeated exactly what she said in April, which was that they would stand by no matter what the WHO and their amendments. Of course, no voting. So yes, it was, and yeah, when the audience, the people like us in the back of the room, laughed or raised a murmur, they were of course shut down by Sir Whatever at the top. I'm afraid to say those qualifications like Sir and King mean nothing to me anymore. Yeah, that's just my thoughts on it anyway. Complete disaster.
Well, thank you for taking the time to watch it. The floor is open. Anybody else care to add anything? That's the whole purpose of having these meetings, is to get some feedback from everybody here. If anybody has any questions, and there you go. KP, the floor is yours.
Can you hear me, James? Okay. I'd like to find out if it's possible to exit the WHO. I know the Americans can do that, but is it possible for any other state actually to exit the WHO, because we are bound by the UN resolutions from early 1948, as I understand it? Is it possible for the countries to exit the WHO?
That is, as simple as making that political decision. So nations have entered into and left treaties countless times, throughout history. In the Vienna Convention on Treaties from 1969, on a very simplistic level, I'll try to make this by using an analogy, right? If you're in a contract with someone and they violate the contract, contract's null and void, you're out. And so if the original intent of the agreement is not being fulfilled, contract becomes null and void. And so the United States is either a good or a bad example, however you want to look at it. We seem to come and go in and out of treaties however the hell we damn well please. Okay. And so if you just look at the history of the United States just leaving whatever treaty no longer suits us, it becomes obvious that it's not about whether or not a nation can or cannot leave. It's whether or not the political will to do it is there. And ultimately that comes from the people, because I don't like to refer to public servants as leaders, because the only place they're going to lead us is off a cliff. The people need to lead ourselves. And it's a high bar. It's a difficult goal. But, one thing that anyone could ask is, what is the benefit that we are getting from membership? If you joined a country club, if you joined an exercise club, if you joined, a bridge club, okay, and you were not getting any benefit from your membership, do you just continue even when they get to the point where the relationship has become abusive? And so there will be many people who will weigh in on the legal, methodology by which one might leave. For the United States, it's actually very easy, because when the United States got into the WHO, the agreement or the joint resolution in Congress stated very clearly, nothing that the WHO says or does imparts any obligation on us, and we'll give them a 1-year notice and we can leave anytime we want. And so that reservation was accepted. And if that's acceptable for any given nation, it's just the political will to do so that is really required. Go ahead, you get your hand up again.
Okay. What frightened me the most yesterday when I heard the English Minister of Health answers was that he said, as I understood it, that it's every government who point out the delegates in the working group of the IHR, and so the governments know exactly what has been discussed in the working group, and how can the ministers allow that to happen when it's against the constitutions of all the countries in the first place? How can they negotiate something at 6 group meetings and not withdrawing any of the suggested amendments when it's obviously against the country's constitution? Do you know what I mean by this? Do you understand my question, James?
I do understand your question.
Okay.
One of the issues is the amendments that were really in question, that were supposed to be discussed, were actually submitted by the UK along with other nations on May 24th, 2022.
Exactly.
So what should have been discussed but was not was, why did the UK government submit those amendments on May 24th, 2022? Now, arguably, it was a different government in May of 2022. You've gone through a couple of changes. And so had they been on the top of their game, if that question had been raised, there's a handful of nations around the world that have had a change of government in those 18 months. They very easily could have said, oh, well, that was Boris Johnson, or that was, whomever. But the question wasn't even raised. Why did your government submit those amendments? It's not about the negotiation that's currently going on. Okay. They put their name on the originally submitted document.
Right?
Where was the discussion about that?
Exactly.
Okay.
My point.
And to follow up with the currently being negotiated large collection of amendments, on one level, they've been completely secret since September of 2022. We know what the original submissions are, but there have been negotiations all year long, and there have been revised versions that have not been made public. And so, to be fair, they are in the middle of negotiations, and it's a fluid situation. They haven't given any updates on those particular documents, but the deadline for the final version is January 27th, 4 months in advance of the May Assembly. Not a single person said, you realize that the working group is openly conspiring to break the rule that has that deadline. They've already scheduled meetings for February and April. They have no intention of making the final version public prior to January 27th. They have stated that. It's on video. They've scheduled meetings, and they're not doing anything to, make a new version available. That's a violation. That should postpone it at the very least to 2025. And so not a single word was spoken about that open, blatant plot to break the rules.
If I can continue with another question about this.
Mhm.
I heard the chair, the last IHR meeting was speaking about that the 300 amendments proposed is already accepted by the DG, so that he only needs to be reported what's going to happen in the meeting in February. He has accepted that there is the 300 amendments. They are not nullified. They're not rejected. They are in play at this very time. Could that be correct?
That is an interesting argument that they are putting forth. Okay, so there's 197 pages of amendments from 94 countries, 300 plus amendments. They have all been submitted to the working group. To my knowledge, no nation has officially submitted any of those amendments to the WHO to be considered in May of 2024. So that's a misrepresentation of the situation. Now, there still is time for any of those nations to submit whatever they care to submit to the Director General to then forward to all of the member nations prior to January 27th, but they haven't actually officially done that. So stating that that has been done, I think, is a little bit flawed. Interestingly, please realize that if a simple majority of nations were to adopt any set of amendments in May, that's what's needed. They don't need to have consensus. They just need a majority. And so if the member nations who are bickering amongst themselves were really paying attention, they could tell the working group, the Bureau, to shove off. And if 100 nations got together and negotiated whatever agreement they wanted, they could submit amendments the same way that the United States did, the same way that the UK and the EU and the US did. You know, there has not been, to my knowledge, an official submission from a nation or a group of nations to the Director General saying, please consider this package of amendments in May of 2024, you know, and submit that in the proper 4-month notice. So I think that's a misinformation based on a regurgitation of statements made, not actions actually done.
Can I pose you a question more? Because, you know, have you seen the IHR meeting from the 6th to the 8th December?
It wasn't
You
the
saw
6th,
that?
it was the 7th and the 8th. And yes, I have.
Just a cut. Yeah.
Yep.
Did you notice when the woman from Monaco asked
Oh, I
her
most certainly
question?
did. I most certainly did.
Okay.
For
But, you
everybody else,
know, I think
if you would share what you're talking about.
it's just that she was asking about the I think Article 55, whether that was regarded in this matter, and I think it was on that occasion that the chair said that it was not a problem, because the DG has already accepted the 300 amendments that we are talking about here by the IHR. And if that's true, it really, really frightens me. And it also frightens me to see how young the delegates are. And, you know, and if it's right that the states delegates are appointed by the governments, they must all know exactly what they are doing when they negotiate these kinds of things. So I'm very frightened. I'm scared almost to death of this. And if it happens that this is actually a world coup, a world health coup with One Health, as Klaus Schwab has mentioned, he wants the world to become. I think all the world's population needs to fight this together at once and at the same time, actually. And how do we inform our you know, I'm in Denmark now. What do we do to inform of this and all the countries that something is actually going on, and we need to be careful about this? What do we do?
Couple of things. I am actually quite optimistic, because quietly in the background, many of the nations are exceedingly unhappy with the status of not just the negotiations, but how the negotiations are being controlled. One of the lies that they continually repeat is that it's a member nation-led process, but it isn't. The bureaucracy, or the bureau, has been rejecting proposals from various member nations and severely controlling the editing of the text of whatever the latest version might be. And many nations, quietly, diplomatically, behind the scenes, not in public, not in the mainstream media, are very unhappy that their wishes are not being put into the documents. I can talk about that, but I want to mention a few other things that you mentioned. So I'm not fearful. I'm not, whatever the phrase was that you said. I see this as an opportunity to split the WHO in two because the nations are arguing amongst themselves and they're not happy with the bureaucracy that's, running roughshod over their wishes. I wouldn't be surprised to wake up one day, not that this would be a good thing, but to hear that there's been created a BHO. The BRICS nation at some point in time may say, hey, we're going to have our own health organization. To heck with these oligarchs at the WHO. We want to do things our way. And all they have to do is make a better deal for any of the nations. Do you want to join the WHO or do you want to join the BHO? Now, that's just a rumor, right? I'm just making that up. But I wouldn't be surprised at some point that the nations who called for these negotiations because they wanted what they wanted, if they don't get what they want, this whole thing falls apart. And so what they're trying to do is placate the nations who are making demands. And it's a difficult negotiations to get 194 nations together, but they only need about 100. And so the African nations are 47. The group for equity, that's a group of nations, that's what they refer to themselves. Last time I checked, there were 29 nations. There's a little bit of overlap. Sum total, about 70 nations are not happy. And if they rounded up a couple of island nations around the world and got to 100, they could tell the United States and the UK and the European Union and Canada and Australia and Germany and everybody else to go take a hike and get a majority. And that's the problem. This whole thing is one nation, one vote. So, think of the large populated nations, China, India, the United States, Brazil, Indonesia, Nigeria, Germany, the UK, they get one vote. All of the little tiny nations get one vote. And so a majority could easily be cobbled together and these amendments could be adopted. And then at that point, what does the UK or the Netherlands or the United States decide? Do we want to reject those amendments and put a fracture right down the middle of the WHO? It's a soap opera. It's not about sovereignty. This is where people are missing the boat. What's going on here is a business deal. They're negotiating about intellectual property and investment and manufacturing plants to make more, of the things that they call pandemic response or pandemic related products. And the issue is in any nation, wherever you may be, do you have any level of control over the executive branch of your government that is making these decisions, as you said, choosing delegates who are going to have these negotiations? Where is the feedback? Now, in the Netherlands, I published an article a couple of weeks ago, document after document after document after document, where the European Commission is speaking on behalf of all 27 nations, submitting proposals to these negotiations. Now, how do they speak for all 27 nations about health? It's supposed to be with unanimity. And so they're breaking their own sets of rules. Now, coming back into the nitty-gritty of it, because I've exposed this in the United States, if you look into documents that I've published about the Foreign, Commonwealth, and Development Office, there is a chain of command, there is a chain of authority that comes, quite frankly, from the king through that department. And the minister has authority to negotiate, and other people in that department or that office have authority to negotiate. But for a civil servant to be involved in those negotiations, that authority has to be delegated. And for the health minister to say that they don't want to name the civil servants, well, hold on just a moment. that authority doesn't come through the health department. That comes from the Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office. And unless it's been properly transferred here in the United States, the question still remains, are the people involved have they properly been delegated the authority to be conducting these negotiations? And until they provide documentation to that effect, one has to assume that it hasn't been given. And so, there's so much fraud and administrative malfeasance going on. I was very disappointed that none of it was mentioned yesterday. So we got about 15 minutes left, and the floor is open for anybody else who has the question. KP, if you have more, please do.
I do. I could just tell you that we in Denmark, Malou, Malou Monclair, I know that you're talking to her. I'm in the same WHO group. I know all that you laid out. I've been listening and reading everything. In Denmark, we know all our delegates. The health minister is the head of the Danish delegation, the health minister. And so she should be accountable for some questions directly from the Danish people about what is going on, what is actually happening here.
Let me ask you.
What do you think about?
Well,
we need to ask her. Well, yeah, go ahead.
While everything that you say, I'm sure, is accurate, the question of where does the authority reside is most often in the Foreign Affairs Department. And this is where a lot of people get confused. Now, I don't know the details of law in the Netherlands in that regard. I'd encourage you to dig in and find out. In many other nations, people have tried to communicate with their members of parliament, and their members of parliament have zero authority, zero. They've tried to communicate with their health ministers, and their health ministers actually have zero authority, despite what you would like to believe. In general, usually, this comes under the foreign ministry authority. And so when you look into any given nation, you realize that you might be talking to the wrong people. They might not even know that they don't actually have authority. First question is always question authority. Pardon me, can you show me in either the Constitution or statute where you have been given that authority? And it may or may not be the case. And so if you're pulling on the wrong lever or pushing the wrong button, talking to the wrong person, and this is what's been going on in many countries, in Canada, Australia, New Zealand, the members of parliament do not have an opportunity to vote on any treaty, agreement, amendments, accord, convention, whatever. It's completely out of their hands. They're only brought in to enact implementing legislation after the executive branch of government has made the decision. And so the UK is different, that the executive branch will make the decision, but they were supposed to have presented it to Parliament for the option to reject it. And they just conveniently neglected to do so. Now, in the Netherlands, it may be that Parliament is supposed to vote affirmatively. And if that's the case, well, that didn't happen with the 2022 amendments. So how can that be seen? Well, there's this trick that's being played with the international health regulations, where it's assumed that if you don't reject them after 18 months, okay, too late, you missed your chance. But it's compounded by the fact that the amendments were illegitimately never voted on. So, it's a soap opera. It's a soap opera, and people need to get clear on the facts because there's enough fraud to go around, that people need to be talking about the fraud, not maybe what's going to happen next March or next May. I'm sorry. What has already happened is fraud and administrative malfeasance and conspiracy to violate the rules going forward. That's what people should be talking about, because there's evidence of that. It's not speculation about what somebody might be doing in the future. That's a waste of time.
But even if we can determine that that it's fraud, how can we tell the Danish citizens and citizens around the world as quick as possible that they are fraudulent towards us, the people in the process? How do we get mainstream population or perhaps media to try to penetrate the media, so it's possible for somebody to get some information about this?
I'll put a link in the chat. It's an article that I've collected all of this stuff together. But Tamana, you had a question?
I know we don't have much time, but just what, because the problem is trying to wake up enough of a mass, and you said we don't need the mass necessarily, but could we just skip the whole we have to inform everybody and just go straight to the legal action? Is that possible, just to expedite the whole, because this is the whole, trying to prove to people, get alternative media on board, and it's like time is being lost. We've got the facts, we've got the evidence, we've got the proof. Can it just be shortcut to legal action?
Well,
That's
see,
my question.
it's a very good question. And there was a gentleman on the previous call who raised a similar question. The problem is, what court has jurisdiction over the WHO? Now, I don't know the answer to that. And I've spoken to, international lawyers, and one of them that I mentioned earlier, Sylvia Berendt, has spoken at great length that the problem is these international organizations are unaccountable. And so, short of, finding out that, the International Criminal Court or some other jurisdiction truly can bring the WHO to justice, the alternative is people power, awareness, pushback, to the point where if enough people know that fraud has been committed, more eyeballs tend to watch what's going on. And the more people that are watching this, the better. And I'm not saying it's easy, but the issue is, if nobody knows, if all of this is done in secrecy and, darkness, well, they're just going to keep doing what they're doing. But, you tell one person, they tell somebody, it's mind bending. And at some point, when people see what's going on, they spread the word and they spread the word. Anybody who's talking about this right now is evidence that the word has spread. And they would have loved to there have never been a debate, that none of this would have ever been made public, that nobody had the foggiest idea. Everybody's just, bless you all, Christmas is 6 days away, and here we are talking about this. None of this was ever supposed to be discussed if they would have had their way. They would have just quietly have been negotiating. So go ahead, KP, you got your hand up.
Has any state opted out properly, in the right fashion, acknowledged by the WHO?
To my knowledge, no. Many individual people have spoken up in many different ways. On one level, if by opting out you mean rejecting the amendments that were,
Yep.
Right. Well, on one level, the universe has given us an unusual plot twist. If you look at the letter that was written by the members of the European Parliament to Tedros saying, if you don't provide evidence of a proper vote, then those amendments are null and void. And so it's an interesting plot twist at the very sort of last moment where it doesn't really matter that they didn't reject them. They're null and void because they were never properly voted on. Now, raising that issue and bringing it into people's awareness, I think an enormous opportunity was missed yesterday. That's unfortunate. We have to go forward and raise that issue all the more. You know, you realize that the WHO carried on a fraudulent act and didn't properly do. I mean, if you don't pay your bills, they come after you, right? If you claim that you paid your bills, but you didn't, that's not good enough, right? They claim to have voted to adopt amendments, and they don't have evidence that they did because they didn't. If that doesn't start to make people wonder about what the heck is going on at the WHO, and you know, then it wasn't presented to Parliament, and now they're conspiring to break another rule in plain sight. What we need to do is show people very clearly how this entire thing is fraudulent. Worrying about the details of what's in the amendments is important, but it's a couple of orders of magnitude lower in power than evidence of fraud, evidence of administrative malfeasance, and evidence of a conspiracy to violate international law. Why are they talking about what they were talking about? So we're down under a minute. We'll be back at the top of the hour again. All of the previous videos are already on the article. Thank you everybody for being here. I appreciate it greatly. And we'll catch you on the next one.
Thank you for being alive, James. I'm looking forward to the next.
Well, I appreciate that
Thank you.
myself. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.